The morning mist rose from the Tennessee River like ghostly fingers reaching toward heaven, and 9-year-old Emma Claire Whitman pressed her face against the canvas of their covered wagon, watching the water dance in the early sunlight. Beside her younger sister Lucy Rose, barely 7 years old, clutched a cornhusk doll their mother had made during the long weeks of travel from Virginia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Look, Lucy, Emma whispered, pointing toward the cascading waterfall they could hear but not yet see through the trees. Papa says we'll camp near the falls tonight. Real Cherokee country. Lucy's green eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Unlike Emma, who devoured every story their father told about the frontier, Lucy found comfort in familiar things. Her doll, her mother's lullabies, the small leather-bound book of poems their grandmother had given her before they left Richmond. There, Father Captain James Whitman rode alongside the lead wagon of their small train. A former Army engineer turned surveyor, he had been commissioned by the Tennessee Land Company to map potential routes for future settlements through the mountainous regions where few white families had dared to venture. The year was 1838, and tensions between settlers and the remaining Cherokee bands ran high, but James Whitman believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. The Cherokee have lived in these mountains for countless generations, he had told his wife Margaret just the night before as they sat around their small campfire. They understand this land in ways we're still learning. There's wisdom in respecting that knowledge. Margaret Whitman, a schoolteacher from a prominent Richmond family, had initially opposed the journey, leaving the safety and comfort of Virginia society for the untamed wilderness of eastern Tennessee seemed unnecessary, even reckless. But her husband's passion for his work and his genuine respect for the native peoples had eventually won her over. The girls will receive an education in life that no classroom could provide, James had argued, and Margaret had come to see the truth in his words. Emma's natural curiosity about the world around her seemed to flourish in the open spaces, and even shy Lucy was beginning to show more confidence as she adapted to their nomadic lifestyle. The Whitman family traveled with the Hendersons. Robert Henderson, a merchant seeking new trading opportunities, his wife Catherine, and their teenage son William. Behind them rode the Kowalski family, recent immigrants from Poland who spoke broken English but possessed remarkable skills in metalworking and craftsmanship. The final wagon carried the Morrison family, David Morrison, a minister hoping to establish churches in the frontier communities, his wife Sarah, and their twin boys, aged 10, 8 wagons in total, carrying 26 souls through the Cumberland Gap and into the heart of Cherokee territory. They had been traveling for 6 weeks, following ancient Native American trails that James had studied in military maps and civilian surveys. The route was challenging but passable, winding through valleys and along ridgelines that offered spectacular views of the Appalachian Mountains. Emma had appointed herself the group's unofficial chronicler, keeping a detailed journal of their daily experiences. Her mother had encouraged this practice, believing it would help develop Emma's writing skills, while preserving memories of their extraordinary journey. May 15, 1838, Emma had written the previous evening by firelight. We passed through a valley today where Papa says Cherokee families once grew corn and beans. You can still see the terraces they built into the hillsides. William Henderson found some pottery pieces, but Papa made him leave them where they lay. He says disturbing such things is disrespectful to the people who made them. Lucy, meanwhile, had developed her own way of processing their journey. She collected small treasures, interesting stones, pressed flowers, feathers, and created elaborate stories about each one. Her cornhusk doll, whom she had named Rosemary after their grandmother, served as the audience for these tales. Rosemary, Lucy would whisper to her doll each night, "Today we saw a hawk that followed our wagons for miles. I think it was watching over us, making sure we stayed safe." The relationship between the sisters reflected their different personalities, but was strengthened by their shared sense of adventure. Emma, with her dark hair and serious brown eyes, possessed an analytical mind that constantly questioned and categorized their experiences. Lucy, blonde and blue-eyed like their mother, approached the world with an intuitive understanding that often surprised the adults around her. Their mother, Margaret, had noticed how the journey was changing both girls. Emma's confidence grew daily as she mastered new skills, helping to prepare meals over an open fire, assisting with the care of their horses, learning to identify edible plants and potential dangers. Lucy, initially overwhelmed by the constant change and uncertainty, had found her footing by becoming the group's unofficial peacemaker, possessing an uncanny ability to sense when tensions rose among the adults and diffuse them with her gentle humor. The wagon train had developed its own rhythms and relationships over the weeks of travel. James Whitman had emerged as the natural leader, his military experience and surveying knowledge making him invaluable for navigation and camp security. Robert Henderson handled much of the trading with the few settlers they encountered, while David Morrison led evening prayers and provided counsel when disputes arose. The women had formed their own support network. Margaret Whitman and Catherine Henderson shared teaching duties for the children, while Sarah Morrison proved skilled at treating minor injuries and illnesses with herbs and remedies she had learned from her grandmother. The Polish immigrant, Anna Kowalski, spoke little English, but communicated through gestures and shared work, contributing her expertise in preserving food and mending equipment. As their wagon descended toward the river valley where they planned to make camp, Emma noticed her father's increased alertness. He had been studying the surrounding forest more carefully for the past 2 days, occasionally dismounting to examine tracks or broken vegetation that meant nothing to Emma but clearly conveyed information to his trained eye. "Something's different," Emma wrote in her journal that morning. "Papa keeps looking over his shoulder, and Mr. Henderson has started keeping his rifle across his saddle instead of stored in the wagon. The adults think we children don't notice these things, but we do." Lucy had noticed too, in her own way. "The birds aren't singing the same," she told Emma that morning. "They sound worried." Their mother, Margaret, was teaching a geography lesson to the children as their wagon rolled through a grove of ancient oak trees. "The Cherokee called these mountains the Great Blue Hills," she explained, pointing toward the misty peaks visible through the canopy. "They believed the mountains were sacred, home to spirits that protected their people." "Are the spirits still there?" Lucy asked, her small voice serious. Margaret considered the question carefully. Unlike many frontier families, the Whitmans had not filled their children's heads with stories portraying Native Americans as savage enemies. James's military experience had taught him to respect worthy adversaries, and his surveying work had shown him evidence of sophisticated agricultural and architectural achievements that challenged popular stereotypes. "I believe they are," Margaret answered honestly, "not the way we might understand spirits, but the knowledge and wisdom of people who lived in harmony with this land for many generations. That kind of understanding doesn't just disappear." Emma added this exchange to her mental collection of things to record in her journal. She had begun to see patterns in her parents' conversations and teaching moments, a deliberate effort to prepare her and Lucy for encounters with people and situations that might challenge their preconceptions. The sound of the waterfall grew, louder as they approached their intended camping spot, a natural clearing beside the river where previous travelers had obviously rested. Stone rings marked old fire pits, and the grass had been worn by countless wagon wheels and horse hooves. "Perfect," James announced, dismounting to survey the area. "Fresh water, good grazing for the animals, and natural protection on 3 sides." As the families began the familiar routine of making camp, Emma and Lucy were given permission to explore the immediate area under William Henderson's supervision. The teenage boy had proven himself responsible and knowledgeable about frontier safety, making him a trusted chaperone for the younger children. They followed a narrow path toward the source of the thundering water sounds, emerging onto a rocky outcrop that provided a spectacular view of the falls. Water plunged nearly 60 feet from the cliff above, creating a constant mist that supported lush plant growth and carved a deep pool at its base. "It's beautiful," Lucy breathed, her usual shyness overcome by wonder. Emma was already imagining how she would describe the scene in her journal, the way the water caught the afternoon light, creating tiny rainbows in the mist. The variety of plants growing in the spray zone, different from anything they had seen during their journey. The sense of ancient permanence that surrounded this place. The Cherokee probably had a name for this waterfall, William suggested. "My father says they name everything, every river, every mountain, every significant landmark. They know this country like we know the streets of our hometown." As they stood admiring the natural spectacle, Lucy suddenly tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Look," she whispered, pointing across the river, on the far bank, barely visible through the mist and late afternoon shadows, a figure stood watching them. Even at that distance, they could see it was a woman, elderly, wearing clothing that marked her as Cherokee. She stood with perfect stillness, observing the white children with an expression they couldn't read. "Should we tell the adults?" William asked uncertainly. Before anyone could answer, the figure raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or simply acknowledgement of their presence. Then she turned and disappeared into the forest with the fluid grace of someone who belonged completely to this environment. "She didn't seem dangerous," Emma observed, "just curious about us." "Maybe she's curious about who's camping by her waterfall," Lucy suggested, with the intuitive wisdom that often surprised her elders. They returned to camp as the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, the image of the Cherokee woman lingering in their thoughts. The adults received news of the sighting with various degrees of concern and interest, but James Whitman's reaction was notably calm. "Probably checking to see if we're peaceful travelers or potential threats," he suggested. "The fact that she didn't try to hide or drive us away is likely a good sign." As evening approached, the families gathered around their central fire for the communal meal and evening prayers that had become tradition during their journey. The Morrison twins regaled the group with stories of fish they had seen jumping in the river, while Anna Kowalski shared some of her preserved sausage that added flavor to their simple stew. Margaret Whitman brought out her small fiddle, leading the group in songs that echoed across the water and mixed with the constant sound of the falls. Emma loved these evening gatherings, when the separate families became one community united by their shared adventure and mutual dependence. "Tomorrow we'll follow the river northwest for about 10 miles, James announced, consulting his maps. "By firelight. According to my calculations, we should reach the valley I've been commissioned to survey by late afternoon." "Will there be other people there?" Catherine Henderson asked. "Settlers, I mean?" James shook his head. "Unlikely. That's why the land company wants it mapped, to determine its suitability for future development. But we may encounter Cherokee, hunting parties, or families who still maintain seasonal camps in the area." "Are you concerned about that?" David Morrison inquired, his minister's training making him sensitive to underlying tensions. "Concerned about being respectful guests in their ancestral homeland," James replied carefully. "These mountains have been Cherokee territory for longer than our families have been in America. The least we can do is conduct ourselves with dignity and appreciation." As the fire burned low and families began preparing for sleep, Emma helped her mother secure their belongings inside their wagon, while Lucy played quietly with her doll beside their bedrolls. "Mama," Emma asked as they worked, "what do you think will happen to the Cherokee people. Papa says the government wants them to move west, but these are their homes. Margaret paused in her folding, considering how to answer such a complex question honestly, without burdening her daughter with adult worries. I don't know, sweetheart. There are people in Washington who believe it would be better for everyone if the tribes moved to designated areas in the West. But there are also Cherokee who have lived here for generations and don't want to leave. It doesn't seem fair, Emma observed, with the moral clarity of childhood. Many things about grown-up. Politics aren't fair, Margaret agreed. That's why it's important for people like your father to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their race or background. Sometimes individual kindness can build bridges that politics can't. Lucy looked up from her doll. The lady by the waterfall looked sad, she said quietly. Both Emma and Margaret turned to her in surprise. Sad how? Margaret asked. Lucy struggled to find words for her impression, like she was remembering something that made her heart hurt, but also like she was strong enough to carry the sadness without letting it make her mean. Margaret exchanged a glance with Emma, both recognizing the unexpected depth of Lucy's observation. The youngest member of their family often seemed to perceive emotional undercurrents that others missed. As they settled into their bedrolls beneath the wagon, the sisters listened to the constant music of the waterfall mixing with the normal night sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the darkness an owl called, and another answered from across the river. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma, Lucy whispered, do you think we'll see the Cherokee lady again? Emma considered this question as she stared up at the wagon's canvas cover. I hope so, she said finally. But if we do, I think it will be because she wants to see us, not because we're looking for her. The sound of the falls created a rhythmic backdrop for sleep, but Emma found herself too excited by the day's discoveries to rest easily. She thought about the ancient terraces they had passed, evidence of generations of careful agriculture. She remembered the pottery shards William had found and her father's insistence on leaving them undisturbed. She pictured the elderly Cherokee woman standing across the river, watching their small group with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge and experience. In her mind, Emma began composing the journal entry she would write tomorrow, trying to capture not just the facts of their day, but the feeling of being guests in a landscape shaped by peoples whose stories she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring new miles, new discoveries, and new opportunities to learn about this complex and beautiful country. Tonight, she was content to listen to the water's endless song and dream about the adventures that lay ahead. Lucy had already drifted off to sleep, her cornhusk doll clutched against her chest, a small smile playing around her lips as if her dreams were filled with pleasant discoveries. Around them, the other families settled into their own rest, confident in their safety and optimistic about their mission. None of them could imagine that by tomorrow evening their peaceful journey would be transformed into a desperate struggle for survival, or that the Cherokee woman Lucy had described as carrying sadness with strength would become the most important person in the sisters' lives. But tonight, beside the falls that had been a landmark for countless generations of travelers, the Whitman family slept peacefully, their dreams filled with the promise of tomorrow's journey and the exciting unknown that lay ahead. Dawn arrived with an unusual stillness that even the youngest members of the wagon train noticed. The birds, which typically filled the morning air with their territorial songs and mating calls, remained silent in the trees surrounding their camp. The waterfall continued its eternal thunder, but somehow the absence of other natural sounds made even that familiar noise seem ominous. Emma woke first, as was her habit, and immediately sensed something wrong. The quality of light filtering through their wagon's canvas suggested the sun had been up for at least an hour, yet none of the adults were stirring with their usual morning efficiency. She crawled carefully over her still sleeping sister and peered out between the canvas flaps. The campsite lay in unnatural quiet. No smoke rose from the central fire pit where Mrs. Morrison typically prepared morning coffee. No sounds of livestock being tended or wagons being prepared for travel. Even the horses seemed restless, shifting and snorting in their picket line as if sensing invisible threats. "Papa?" Emma called softly, but received no response from her parents' bedroll beneath the wagon. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest beyond their camp's perimeter, then another. Not the random sounds of deer or other wildlife moving through the underbrush, but the deliberate footfalls of people trying to move quietly, but failing to achieve complete silence. Emma's heart began to race as she understood what her father's military training had taught her to recognize. They were being watched, possibly surrounded. She reached back to shake Lucy awake, pressing a finger to her lips when her sister's eyes opened. "We need to be very quiet," Emma whispered, directly into Lucy's ear. Something's wrong. Lucy's natural sensitivity to atmosphere made her instantly alert. Without needing further explanation, she gathered her corn-husk doll and followed Emma as they crept toward the back of their wagon, away from the camp's center. From their concealed position, they watched as armed men began emerging from the tree, lying on multiple sides of the clearing. These were not Cherokee warriors, as Emma might have expected given their location. Instead, they wore a mixture of frontier clothing and military surplus gear, their faces marked by the hard lines and predatory expressions of men who had chosen violence as their way of life. The leader, a tall man with graying hair and cold blue eyes, stepped into the clearing first. He carried a rifle with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to using it, and his gaze swept the quiet camp with professional assessment. "Wake up, pilgrims," he called out in a voice that carried both authority and mockery. "Time to discuss your travel arrangements." James Whitman emerged from beneath his wagon, moving slowly with his hands visible. His military bearing remained evident despite the obvious disadvantage of their situation. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "we're peaceful travelers. If you need supplies or information, we're willing to help." The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Supplies," he says. "Information." He gestured to his men, who began moving through the camp with systematic efficiency. "What we need, surveyor man, is for you to disappear, permanently." "I don't understand," James replied, though Emma could hear the tension beneath his controlled tone. "We have no quarrel with you." "Maybe not," the leader agreed, "but your presence here creates problems for our operation. See this valley you're heading to survey? We've been using it for our own purposes. Supply depot for our activities across 3 territories. Can't have government men mapping our routes and hideouts." Other families were now emerging from their wagons, the children clinging to their parents as the magnitude of their danger became clear. Emma recognized the expressions on the adults' faces, the same look her father had worn when discussing particularly dangerous military campaigns. This was not a robbery or random frontier violence. This was an execution planned and deliberate. "Hayes Brigade," James said quietly, and Emma saw recognition dawn in his eyes. "You're the ones who've been hitting settlements from here to Georgia, disguising yourselves as Cherokee to blame the tribes." The leader, Hayes apparently, smiled with genuine pleasure. "Smart man, too smart for his own good." He raised his rifle. "Nothing personal, understand? Just business." The sound of the first gunshot shattered the morning stillness like thunder. Emma saw her father stumble backward, clutching his shoulder, blood already staining his shirt. Margaret screamed her husband's name and ran toward him, only to be cut down by a second shot before she could reach his side. What followed was chaos beyond Emma's ability to fully process. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the brigands systematically murdered the defenseless families. Robert Henderson fell trying to protect his wife Catherine. The Morrison twins cried out for their parents as both were shot down without mercy. Anna Kowalski collapsed beside her wagon, her hands clutching the embroidered shawl her grandmother had brought from Poland. Emma grabbed Lucy's hand and pulled her toward the river, instinct driving them away from the carnage and toward the only possible escape route. Behind them, the sounds of violence continued. More gunshots, the terrified screaming of horses, the crackling of flames as the wagons were set ablaze to destroy evidence. "Mama!" Lucy sobbed as they stumbled through the underbrush along the riverbank. "Papa, we have to help them." "We can't," Emma gasped, tears streaming down her face as she forced herself to keep moving. "They're gone. We have to run or we'll be killed too." The thundering of the waterfall grew louder as they made their way upstream, the sound masking their footsteps and desperate breathing. Emma's mind raced through possibilities their father had taught her during their journey. Caves in the cliff face behind the falls, narrow paths too dangerous for mounted pursuit, places where children might hide until the killers departed. Shout from behind them indicated their escape had been discovered. "The surveyor's kids got away," someone yelled. "Find them! Can't leave witnesses!" Emma pulled Lucy faster along the treacherous riverside path, her younger sister stumbling on, the wet rocks but never complaining, never letting go of her hand. The roar of falling water grew overwhelming as they approached the falls itself, spray soaking their clothes and making every surface slippery. "There," Emma pointed to a narrow ledge that led behind the cascade. "We can hide back there." The passage was treacherous, requiring them to press against wet stone while water thundered inches from their faces. But Emma's smaller size and Lucy's trust in her sister's judgment allowed them to navigate the dangerous path and reach a shallow cave carved by centuries of water action behind the falls. They huddled together in the darkness, soaked and shivering, listening to the water's roar mask any sounds from outside. Emma held Lucy close, both girls crying silently for their parents, for the other families, for the sudden violent end of their peaceful journey. "Are they all dead?" Lucy whispered, when her tears finally subsided enough for speech. Emma couldn't bring herself to voice what she had witnessed, but her silence provided Lucy with the answer she dreaded. The 7-year-old began to shake with shock and grief, her cornhusk doll the only familiar comfort remaining in a world that had become alien and hostile. Hours passed in their watery hiding place. The morning sun climbed higher, sending occasional shafts of light through the spray that illuminated their cramped refuge. Emma tried to think like her father would, to plan their next moves based on logic rather than fear. The Hayes Brigade would search for them, but probably not for long. Their primary objective was eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence, not hunting two small children through difficult terrain. Once they were satisfied that no immediate threat remained, they would likely depart to avoid any possibility of encountering military patrols or Cherokee warriors who might investigate the smoke from the burning wagons. But that left Emma and Lucy alone in the wilderness with no supplies, no weapons, and no clear idea of how to survive or reach safety. The nearest settlement was probably days of travel away, and the route would take them through territory where the Hayes Brigade might maintain other camps or supply depots. "What do we do now?" Lucy asked, echoing Emma's own desperate uncertainty. Before Emma could attempt an answer, she heard something that made her heart stop. Voices outside their hiding place, muffled by the water, but clearly human. She pressed herself and Lucy deeper into their cave, praying they hadn't been discovered, but the voices weren't speaking English. The words were rhythmic, musical in a way that suggested a different language entirely. Cherokee, Emma realized, remembering conversations she had overheard between her parents about the linguistic differences between various tribal groups. A shadow passed across the light, filtering through the waterfall's spray. Then another. People were moving on the ledge outside their hiding place, but whether they represented salvation or additional danger, Emma couldn't determine. "Hello," a voice called in accented but clear English. "Children who hide behind the falling water. I know you are there. I am not your enemy." Emma held her breath. Lucy pressed against her side. The voice was female, elderly, carrying an authority that reminded Emma somehow of her grandmother back in Richmond. "I saw the smoke from your wagons," the voice continued patiently. "I know what has happened to your families. If you wish to live, you must trust me now." Emma faced an impossible choice: stay hidden and probably die of exposure and starvation, or trust this unknown Cherokee woman who claimed to offer help. Everything her parents had taught her about respecting the native peoples argued for trusting this voice, but fear of the unknown made her hesitate. "My name is Ayana," the woman continued. "In your language, this means eternal blossom. I am grandmother to many children, though most have been taken from these mountains by your government soldiers. I offer you the same protection I would give my own blood." Lucy stirred in Emma's arms. "She sounds kind," she whispered so quietly that only Emma could hear. Emma thought of her father's respect for Cherokee wisdom, her mother's teachings about treating all people with dignity. She thought of the elderly woman they had glimpsed across the river the previous evening, standing with such quiet strength despite whatever sorrows she carried. "We're here," Emma called out, her voice shaking with fear and desperate hope. "We're not armed. Please don't hurt us." "Child," Ayana's voice carried a warmth that seemed to wrap around them even through the thundering water. "I have been waiting for you since the sun first touched the sky. Come out where I can see you. There is much to do if we are to keep you safe." Emma helped Lucy to her feet, and together they made their way carefully back along the treacherous ledge behind the waterfall. As they emerged into the daylight, they found themselves facing a Cherokee woman of perhaps 60 years, her long grey hair braided with feathers and beads, her dark eyes reflecting both ancient wisdom and immediate compassion. She was not alone. 2 younger Cherokee men stood nearby, their expressions wary but not threatening. All 3 carried traditional weapons, bows and knives, but also showed clear evidence of contact with white traders, metal tools, manufactured cloth mixed with traditional deerskin clothing. "Come," Ayana said, extending weathered hands toward both girls. "There is little time. The men who killed your families will return to search more carefully when they realize children escaped. We must be far from here when that happens." Emma hesitated only a moment before taking the offered hand, pulling Lucy with her. Whatever lay ahead with these Cherokee strangers couldn't be worse than certain death alone in the wilderness. As Ayana led them away from the waterfall, along paths invisible to Emma's untrained eyes, the girls cast one last look back toward the smoke still rising from their destroyed camp. Everything they had known, everyone they had loved, lay in ashes behind them. But ahead, guided by a Cherokee grandmother whose presence radiated the same strength Lucy had perceived in the distant figure by the river, lay the possibility of survival. And perhaps something more, a chance to learn about healing wisdom that could help them carry their grief without being destroyed by it. The forest closed around them as Ayana led the sisters along a path that seemed to materialize beneath her feet. Emma noticed how the Cherokee woman moved through the dense underbrush without disturbing a single branch, her moccasined feet finding purchase on stones and roots that appeared treacherous to untrained eyes. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice still hoarse from crying and shock. "To safety first," Ayana replied without turning around. Then to healing. Both will take time, and both require courage you may not know you possess. Lucy stumbled on a hidden route, and one of the Cherokee men immediately steadied her with gentle hands. He spoke to Ayana in their native language, his tone suggesting concern for the child's ability to maintain their pace. "This is my grandson, Sequoia," Ayana explained, noticing Emma's apprehensive look. "Named for the great Cherokee who gave our people the written word. He worries that your sister is too young for mountain travel." Emma looked at Lucy, noting her pale face and the way she clutched her cornhusk doll as if it were her only anchor to sanity. The 7-year-old had witnessed horrors that would break many adults, yet she continued to put one foot in front of the other, trusting in Emma's protection and this stranger's promise of safety. "She's stronger than she looks," Emma said firmly. "We both are." Ayana's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. "Strength comes in many forms, child. Your sister's gentleness is not weakness, any more than your determination is hardness. Both will serve you well in the days ahead." They traveled for what felt like hours through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. The path wound upward along ridgelines that offered occasional glimpses of the valley below, where smoke still marked the location of their destroyed wagon train. Emma forced herself not to look back, focusing instead on the challenging footing and Lucy's need for encouragement. The second Cherokee man, who moved like a scout ahead of their small party, suddenly raised his hand in a signal that brought them all to an immediate halt. He spoke rapidly to Ayana in their own language, pointing towards something Emma couldn't see through the dense forest. "Riders," Ayana translated quietly. 3 of them, moving along the river trail, looking for tracks. Emma's blood turned, cold. The Hayes Brigade had indeed returned to search for them, just as Ayana had predicted. She pulled Lucy closer, both girls instinctively understanding the need for absolute silence. Sequoia melted into the forest with fluid grace, disappearing so completely that Emma wondered if she had imagined his presence. Minutes passed in tense quiet before he reappeared, reporting to his grandmother in whispered Cherokee. "They found where you entered the water," Ayana explained, her voice barely audible. "But they cannot follow the path behind the falls. They are arguing about whether children could survive such a route." The distant sound of horses moving through undergrowth confirmed her words. Emma realized with growing terror that their pursuers were close enough to hear if either sister made the slightest noise. Lucy began to tremble, whether from cold, exhaustion, or fear. Emma couldn't tell. The younger girl's lips were taking on a bluish tinge that reminded Emma of something her mother had taught her about exposure and shock. They needed shelter, warmth, and food soon, or Lucy's condition would become dangerous, regardless of whether they evaded their pursuers. Ayana seemed to sense the child's distress without looking directly at her. From a leather pouch at her waist, she withdrew what appeared to be dried berries mixed with some kind of fat or honey. She offered a small portion to each girl, gesturing for them to eat slowly. The mixture was unlike anything Emma had tasted before, sweet and savory simultaneously, with an energy that seemed to spread through her body almost immediately. Lucy's color improved noticeably after consuming her portion, and her trembling subsided to occasional shivering. "Medicine food," Ayana whispered, "gives strength when the body has forgotten how to find it." The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, as the Hayes Brigade riders apparently decided the waterfall route was impassable for children. Emma allowed herself a moment of relief, but Ayana's expression remained alert and concerned. "They will not give up easily," she said once she was certain their enemies had departed. "Men like these cannot afford to leave witnesses alive. They will watch the valley approaches, question anyone who might have seen you. We must travel carefully and reach the hidden places before they expand their search." They resumed their journey at a pace that challenged even Emma's determination. The trail led ever upward, following ridgelines and traversing steep slopes that required careful attention. To every step, Lucy began to lag despite the medicine food, her shorter legs struggling with terrain designed for adult Cherokee hunters. Without being asked, Sequoia lifted Lucy onto his shoulders, speaking to her in soothing tones despite the language barrier. The exhausted child relaxed against his strong back, her grip on her corn-husk doll loosening as the rhythm of his steady pace lulled her toward sleep. "Your sister has found a protector," Ayanna observed, watching Emma's anxious monitoring of this arrangement. "Sequoia lost his own little sister to the removal soldiers 2 seasons ago. Caring for yours helps heal his heart as much as it aids." Her feet. Emma didn't fully understand the reference to removal soldiers, but the pain in Ayanna's voice suggested another tragedy, another family torn apart by forces beyond their control. She wondered how many losses this Cherokee woman had endured, how many children she had seen taken or killed, how she maintained her apparent strength in the face of such repeated sorrow. As if reading her thoughts, Ayanna continued, "The government. Men came with papers and soldiers, saying all Cherokee must leave our ancestral homes and walk to new lands in the West. Many families were forced to abandon everything: houses, farms, sacred places, graves of their ancestors. Those who resisted were driven away at gunpoint." The enormity of this revelation struck Emma like a physical blow. Her father had spoken of tensions between settlers and native tribes, but always in abstract terms of competing interests and cultural differences. She had never imagined entire populations being forced from their homes at the point of military weapons. "But you're still here," Emma pointed out. Ayanna's smile carried both sadness and defiance. "Some of us hid in the deepest mountains, places the soldiers fear to search. We live as our great-grandparents lived, taking what the land provides, leaving no trace for those who would hunt us. It is not the life we chose, but it is the life that allows us to remain in the land of our birth." They paused at a mountain spring, where clear water bubbled from between moss-covered rocks. Ayanna showed Emma how to cup her hands properly to drink without disturbing the delicate plant life around the source. A small lesson that revealed volumes about Cherokee attitudes toward their environment. "Everything is connected," Ayanna explained. As Emma watched her careful movements, "The water that flows here feeds the plants feed the animals feed us. When we take only what we need and give thanks for what we receive, the circle remains unbroken." Lucy had awakened during their rest stop and now sat beside the spring, washing her face with water so cold it made her gasp. But her eyes seemed clearer, more focused than they had been since witnessing their parents' murder. "The water tastes different here," she observed with the acute sensitivity that had always marked her perceptions. "Cleaner, like it's been blessed." "Sacred." "Spring," Ayanna confirmed. "My grandmother brought me here when I was your age, taught me the prayers and proper offerings. Now I bring you, continuing the chain of knowledge that must not be broken." The scout, who had been ranging ahead of their party, returned with news that caused Ayanna's expression to tighten with concern. He spoke rapidly in Cherokee, gesturing toward the trail they had been following and pointing to various positions around their current location. "What is it?" Emma asked, reading the tension in their protectors' voices. "More riders," Ayanna replied grimly. "Not the same ones from this morning. These come from the north and they move with purpose. It seems your Hayes Brigade has called for reinforcements." The implications were terrifying. Instead of a simple search party, they now faced a coordinated manhunt that could cover all the obvious escape routes from the valley. Emma realized that their pursuers were treating them not as merely 2 lost children, but as a genuine threat to whatever criminal operations the brigade conducted in this region. How many? Emma asked, surprised by her own calm in the face of escalating danger. Ayana consulted briefly with her scout before answering. At least 6, possibly more. They carry supplies for extended search, which means they will not abandon the hunt quickly. Lucy looked up from the spring where she had been watching minnows dart between the stones. Can we hide until they go away? Not here, Ayana said gently. This spring is known to some white hunters and trappers. If the brigade questions them, someone might remember seeing Cherokee sign in this area. Emma felt the weight of decision settling on her young shoulders. These people had risked their own safety to help 2 white children escape from killers. Now their generosity might expose them to the same violence that had destroyed the wagon train. Maybe we should surrender, Emma said quietly. Turn ourselves in so you won't be in danger because of us. The suggestion brought a flash of something fierce and protective to Ayana's dark eyes. Child, do you think I have lived 62 winters in these mountains to abandon children in their time of greatest need? Do you believe Sequoia would carry your sister on his shoulders only to deliver her to those who killed her parents? Rebuke was gentle but firm, reminding Emma that she was thinking like a child rather than considering the larger principles at stake. These Cherokee people understood something about loyalty and protection that transcended racial boundaries or personal safety. Then what do we do? Emma asked, accepting Ayana's wisdom and leadership. We go deeper, Ayana replied, shouldering her pack and signaling for the others to prepare for departure, to places where even Cherokee seldom venture, where the spirits of our ancestors keep watch, and the paths are known only to those who carry the oldest knowledge. As they prepared to leave the sacred spring, Ayana performed a brief ceremony, speaking words in Cherokee while sprinkling tobacco on the water's surface. Emma watched, fascinated despite their desperate circumstances, sensing she was witnessing something both ancient and deeply meaningful. What did you say? Lucy asked with her characteristic directness. I thanked the water spirits for their gift, Ayana explained, and asked them to keep our enemies confused about which direction we traveled. Whether through spiritual intervention or Ayana's practical knowledge of mountain travel, their route seemed to become increasingly difficult to follow. They crossed rocky ridges where footprints couldn't register, waded through mountain streams that would wash away their scent, and followed game trails so faint that Emma marveled at Ayana's ability to navigate them at all. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks when they finally reached what Ayana called the hidden place, a narrow canyon whose entrance was concealed behind a screen of ancient rhododendron bushes. Inside, protected by towering stone walls and watered by a seasonal creek, lay a secret valley that felt completely removed from the outside world. Here we can rest safely, Ayana announced, setting down her pack beside what appeared to be the remnants of old campsites. The brigade may search for days without finding this entrance, and we have everything needed for survival until the danger passes. Emma looked around the hidden canyon with wonder. The walls rose so high that only a narrow strip of sky was visible overhead, and the entire floor was carpeted with soft grass and wildflowers. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where the violence and hatred of the outside world couldn't penetrate. But as night began to fall, and the reality of their situation settled over her, Emma realized that reaching safety was only the beginning of their challenges. They were alive, but they were also orphans, completely dependent on the kindness of people from a culture they barely understood, in a land where their very existence made them targets for ruthless killers. Tomorrow would bring new questions about survival, about trust, and about what kind of future 2 white children could build among the Cherokee people who had risked everything to save them. Tonight, however, Emma was content to watch Ayana prepare a simple meal over a carefully concealed fire while Lucy played quietly with her doll beside the murmuring creek. The forest closed around them as they began a journey that would transform them from orphaned refugees into something neither sister could yet imagine. Behind them, the waterfall continued its eternal song, washing clean the stones where their old life had ended and their new one was about to begin. Emma woke before dawn to the sound of Lucy crying out in her sleep, small hands clutching desperately at the Cherokee blankets Ayanna had provided. The nightmares had begun 3 days after their arrival in the hidden canyon, and they returned each night with relentless persistence. Lucy would dream of gunfire, of her parents falling, of flames consuming everything familiar, and wake screaming, in the language of terror that needed no translation. "Mama!" Lucy whimpered without opening her eyes, her face wet with tears. "Don't leave me, Mama." Emma gathered her sister close, rocking her gently while humming the lullaby their mother had sung to them during the long wagon journey that now seemed like a lifetime ago. Around them, the canyon walls rose like protective arms, but Emma had learned that physical safety couldn't shield them from the wounds carved into their hearts. Ayanna stirred on her sleeping mat nearby, instantly alert despite the early hour. The Cherokee grandmother had demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense when either girl needed comfort or care, appearing at their sides with herbal teas, gentle stories, or simply the reassuring presence of someone who understood profound loss. "The dreams are strong tonight," Ayanna observed quietly, moving to prepare something from her collection of medicine bundles. Her spirit is fighting to heal, but the memories resist being transformed into wisdom. Emma watched as Ayanna combined dried herbs with what appeared to be powdered roots, mixing them with water from the sacred spring they had discovered during their first week in the canyon. The resulting tea gave off a soothing fragrance that seemed to calm Lucy even before she drank it. "What is it?" Emma asked, though she had learned to trust Ayanna's medicines completely. "Dreamwalker's helper," Ayanna replied, supporting Lucy's head as the drowsy child sipped the warm liquid. "It teaches the sleeping mind to find paths around dark places, to remember love instead of violence." The past month in the hidden canyon had been a constant battle between healing and despair. During the daylight hours, both sisters threw themselves into learning the skills Ayanna patiently taught them: how to identify edible plants, how to read weather signs in cloud formations, how to move silently through the forest, how to prepare traditional Cherokee medicines from roots and bark and leaves. But the nights brought a different kind of struggle. Emma found herself jolting awake at every unfamiliar sound, certain that Hayes Brigade riders had discovered their sanctuary. Lucy's dreams transported her back to the morning of the massacre with vivid clarity that left her exhausted and fragile. Each dawn, "Will it ever stop hurting?" Lucy asked after finishing the herbal tea, her voice small and lost in the pre-dawn darkness. Ayanna settled beside both girls, her weathered hands gentle as she smoothed Lucy's tangled hair. "Pain is like a river, little one. When it first begins, it rushes and tumbles, destroying everything in its path. But as it flows toward the sea, it learns to find the deeper channels, to nourish instead of destroy." Emma had come to treasure these moments when Ayanna shared the wisdom accumulated through 6 decades of mountain living. The Cherokee grandmother possessed an understanding of human nature that went beyond book learning or formal education, a knowledge earned through surviving countless losses while maintaining her essential humanity. "My own children were taken from me," Ayanna continued, her voice steady despite the pain behind her words. "Some by sickness, some by soldiers, some by the great removal when families were scattered like leaves in winter wind. For many seasons, I thought the pain would consume me like fire consumes dry grass." Lucy lifted her head from Emma's shoulder, drawn by something in Ayanna's tone. "But it didn't." "It changed," Ayanna said simply. "When I stopped fighting the river and learned to follow where it led, I discovered that love doesn't die when people leave us. It transforms, becomes something larger than grief, something that can help others find their way through dark places." Emma struggled to understand this concept while watching her sister's gradual relaxation as the herbal tea took effect. How could love transform into something useful when the people who had given that love were gone forever? How could wisdom emerge from experiences that seemed designed to destroy rather than teach? As if sensing her thoughts, Ayana turned her attention to Emma. "You carry different medicine than your sister, child. Her gift is feeling deeply, yours is seeing clearly. Both are needed for complete healing." "I don't feel wise," Emma admitted. "I feel angry most of the time. Angry at the men who killed our parents. Angry at ourselves for not being able to help. Angry at God for letting it happen." "Anger is also medicine," Ayana said, surprising Emma with this response. "But like all powerful medicines, it must be prepared correctly or it becomes poison. Raw anger destroys. Refined anger becomes justice, protection, the strength to prevent others from suffering as you have suffered." This concept intrigued Emma, who had been struggling with feelings she had been taught were inappropriate for a young lady. Her mother had emphasized gentleness, forgiveness, and Christian acceptance of God's will. But watching her parents murdered had awakened something fierce and uncompromising in Emma's nature, something that demanded accountability and refused to accept injustice as inevitable. "How do you refine anger?" Emma asked. "Through understanding," Ayana replied. "When you understand why evil people choose violence, you begin to see how to prevent their choices from destroying others. When you understand your own strength, you stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a protector." The conversation was interrupted by Sequoia's return from his morning scout of the canyon's perimeter. The young Cherokee man had maintained constant vigilance since their arrival, ensuring that their hideout remained undiscovered while gathering information about brigade activities in the surrounding area. He spoke quietly to his grandmother in their native language, his expression grave. Emma had been learning to read Cherokee facial expressions and body language during their weeks together, and she recognized signs of serious concern in Sequoia's demeanor. "What is it?" Emma asked, Lucy stirring anxiously in her arms. Ayana's face tightened as she processed Sequoia's report. "The Hayes Brigade has not abandoned their search. They have established a permanent camp in the valley below and are questioning every Cherokee family they can find about missing white children." The implications struck Emma like a physical blow. Their presence in Cherokee territory was not only endangering Ayana and her family, but potentially exposing other Cherokee people to interrogation and violence. "We should leave," Emma said immediately. "Find somewhere else to hide so your people won't be in danger because of us." Sequoia spoke again, more urgently, and Ayana's expression grew even more troubled. "There is more," she said reluctantly. "The brigade has sent messages to military posts, claiming that Cherokee raiders attacked your wagon train and kidnapped 2 white children. They are requesting cavalry assistance to rescue you from savage captors." Emma's mind reeled at the audacity of this deception. Not only had the Hayes Brigade murdered their families, but they were now manipulating the military to hunt down the very people who had saved Emma and Lucy from certain death. "They'll blame you for everything," Emma realized with growing horror. "If soldiers find us with you, they'll assume you killed our parents and kidnapped us." "Very likely," Ayana agreed calmly, "which means we must be very careful about how we proceed." Lucy had been listening to this exchange with the intense concentration she brought to conversations she sensed were important. "Why do the bad men want people to think Cherokee did it?" she asked. "Because if people hate Cherokee, they won't. Look for white men who dress like Cherokee when they attack." Ayana explained patiently. "Fear and hatred make people stupid, easier to fool." Emma began to understand the larger pattern behind their family's murder. The Hayes Brigade wasn't just eliminating witnesses to their crimes. They were actively fomenting racial hatred to provide cover for their operations. Every attack they committed, while disguised as Cherokee warriors, increased tensions between white settlers and native tribes, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and violence that served their purposes. "We need proof," Emma said, her analytical mind beginning to work on the problem. "Evidence that shows the brigade committed the murders, while disguised as Cherokee." Ayanna studied Emma with new interest. What kind of evidence? Emma thought carefully, remembering details from the morning of the attack that she had tried to forget. Their leader, Hayes, had a distinctive scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon, and one of his men had a tattoo on his forearm, a snake wrapped around a dagger. If we could find them and show people those markings. "Finding them would be dangerous," Sequoia interjected in his careful English. "They have many men, many guns." "But not finding them means they'll keep killing people and blaming Cherokee," Emma countered. "How many more families will die? How many Cherokee will be punished for crimes they didn't commit?" Ayanna exchanged a long look with her grandson, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded slowly. "There is wisdom in what you say, child. But such a plan would require careful preparation and much courage from people who have already suffered greatly." Lucy, who had been quiet during this strategic discussion, suddenly spoke up. "I want to help stop the bad men too." Emma started to protest that Lucy was too young, too traumatized, too fragile for such dangerous work. But Ayanna's raised hand stopped her objection. "Everyone has gifts that can serve the greater good," the Cherokee grandmother said seriously. "Your sister sees things others miss, feels things others ignore. These are valuable skills for the work ahead." Over the following days, Ayanna began teaching the sisters skills that went far beyond basic survival. Emma learned to track not just animals, but human beings, how to read the story told by footprints, broken branches, and disturbed earth. Lucy was taught to observe facial expressions and voice tones that revealed when people were lying or hiding important information. Cherokee children learn these skills because our survival has always depended on understanding both the natural world and the people who move through it, Ayanna explained as she showed Emma how to identify different types of horse tracks. "You will need the same knowledge to navigate the dangerous path ahead." The training was physically and emotionally demanding. Emma's hands blistered from practicing with traditional Cherokee weapons, bows, knives, and throwing sticks. Lucy struggled to overcome her natural shyness and speak confidently to the Cherokee adults who visited their canyon to assist with the sisters' education. But gradually, both girls began to demonstrate competencies that surprised even Ayanna. Emma developed an almost supernatural ability to move silently through dense forest, while Lucy showed remarkable talent for reading the subtle signs that indicated whether strangers posed threats or offered friendship. "You are becoming something new," Ayanna observed after watching Emma successfully track Sequoia through terrain that had left no visible trail. "Not white, not Cherokee, but children of both worlds who can walk between them with understanding." The concept fascinated Emma, who had never considered that identity could be something chosen rather than simply inherited. Her parents had raised her to be a proper young lady of Virginia society, but that world had been destroyed along with their wagon train. In its place, Ayanna was offering something unprecedented, the chance to become a bridge between cultures, a person who could serve both peoples by preventing the kind of misunderstanding and hatred that men like Hayes exploited. "What about when we're grown?" Lucy asked during one of their evening conversations around the hidden fire. "Will we stay with you always?" Ayanna's smile carried both affection and sadness. "You will go where your hearts call you, little ones. Perhaps that will be with Cherokee people, perhaps with white people, perhaps walking a path that belongs to neither and both. "But we'll always be your granddaughters," Emma said firmly, using the kinship term Ayanna had taught them. "No matter where we go or what we become. Blood makes relatives," Ayanna replied, "but loyalty makes family. You will always be my granddaughters because you choose to be, just as I choose to be your grandmother." As summer progressed and the sisters' skills developed, Ayanna began to share more advanced teachings about Cherokee healing practices. Emma learned to identify dozens of medicinal plants and understand their properties, while Lucy showed natural talent for the more intuitive aspects of healing, reading a patient's spirit as well as their physical symptoms. "Medicine is not just about curing sickness," Ayanna explained as she taught them to prepare poultices and teas. "It is about restoring balance, helping people find harmony between their inner and outer worlds." "Is that what you're doing for us?" Lucy asked with her characteristic directness. "We are doing it together," Ayanna corrected gently. "Healing is not something one person does to another. It is something people do with each other, sharing strength and wisdom until balance returns." Emma began to understand that their time in the hidden canyon was serving multiple purposes. Yes, they were safe from the Hayes Brigade and learning survival skills. But more importantly, they were undergoing a transformation that would enable them to serve a purpose larger than mere survival. "You are being prepared for a mission," Ayanna said one evening as they watched stars appear in the narrow strip of sky visible above their canyon walls. "Not just to prove Cherokee innocence of your family's murder, but to build bridges between peoples who have been taught to fear and hate each other." The weight of this responsibility might have overwhelmed children who had not already faced the worst that human nature could offer. But having survived the destruction of their old world, Emma and Lucy were discovering inner resources they had never known they possessed. "When do we begin?" Emma asked, and Ayanna smiled at the determination in her voice. "You have already begun," the Cherokee grandmother replied. "Every skill you learn, every fear you overcome, every moment you choose healing over hatred, prepares you for the work ahead." As autumn approached and the first cool nights reminded them that seasons continue to change despite human tragedy, Emma found herself looking forward rather than backward for the first time since the massacre. The pain of losing their parents would never completely disappear, but it was beginning to transform into something that could serve others, exactly as Ayanna had promised. Lucy's nightmares had become less frequent, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. And Emma's anger had indeed been refined into something sharper and more useful, a commitment to justice that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The hidden canyon had served its purpose as a sanctuary for healing. Soon, it would be time to emerge from their refuge and begin the dangerous work of proving Cherokee innocence while bringing the Hayes Brigade to justice. But first, there was one more lesson Ayanna needed to teach them, the most important and dangerous skill of all, how to walk between worlds without losing their souls to either. The first snow of winter had begun to dust the canyon walls when Ayanna announced it was time for the sisters to learn the most sacred and dangerous of Cherokee skills, the art of becoming invisible while moving through the white world. Emma, now 10 years old and hardened by months of mountain training, understood immediately that this lesson would determine whether their mission against the Hayes Brigade would succeed or result in their deaths. "To walk between worlds," Ayanna explained, as she opened a leather bundle containing clothes and accessories the sisters had never seen before. "You must become what each world expects to see, while remaining true to your deeper self." Lucy, who had grown taller and more confident during their time in the canyon, examined the white girl's dress that Ayanna lifted from the bundle. It was similar to clothing she had worn during their wagon journey, but something about seeing It now, after months of wearing Cherokee-made garments, made it feel like a costume from a play about someone else's life. "Where did these come from?" Emma asked, recognizing the quality of the fabric and the skilled needlework in the garments. "From Cherokee women who learned to sew like white women so they could trade in frontier towns without being recognized as savage," Ayana replied, her tone carrying bitter knowledge of the prejudices her people had learned to navigate. "They made these clothes for their own daughters, who needed to move safely through white settlements." Sequoia entered their shelter carrying additional items, shoes, hair ribbons, even small pieces of jewelry that would complete the sisters' transformation back into white children. But Emma noticed that his expression was unusually grave, suggesting that this preparation involved more than simply changing clothes. "There is news from the valley," he announced in careful English he had been practicing with the sisters. "The cavalry patrol arrived yesterday. 20 soldiers led by a captain who believes the brigade's story about Cherokee kidnappers." Emma's heart sank as she understood the implications. Military involvement would make their mission exponentially more dangerous, but it also provided an opportunity if they could reach the right people with the truth. "What kind of man is this captain?" Ayana asked, her strategic mind already working on how to turn this development to their advantage. "Young, inexperienced with frontier politics," Sequoia replied, "but he brings written orders from his commanding officer to investigate Cherokee involvement in settler attacks. The brigade has convinced military command that this region harbors hostile natives." Ayana absorbed this information while helping Lucy into the white dress, adjusting the fit and teaching her how to move in the restrictive clothing after months of wearing practical Cherokee garments. Emma watched this transformation with fascination and discomfort, seeing her sister gradually resume the appearance of the child she had been before their world collapsed. "The captain's inexperience could work in our favor," Ayana mused. "Young officers often want to prove themselves by uncovering the truth rather than simply following orders. But approaching him will require perfect timing and irrefutable evidence." Emma understood that their months of preparation were about to be tested. All the skills they had learned, tracking, observation, combat, healing, cultural navigation, would need to work together if they hoped to expose the Hayes Brigade while avoiding capture by either the criminals or the military. "How do we get close enough to the captain to present evidence without being arrested as supposed kidnap victims?" Emma asked. Ayana's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "By giving him something he wants more than the glory of rescuing. White children from savage captors." Over the next 3 days, Ayana and Sequoia implemented a plan that demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence network Cherokee people had developed to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. Messages were sent through channels invisible to white authorities. Information was gathered about brigade movements and military protocols, and careful reconnaissance identified the perfect opportunity for intervention. "The captain has established his base camp at Miller's trading post," Sequoia reported after returning from a scouting mission. "He interviews Cherokee families there, trying to find evidence of your kidnapping. But he grows frustrated because no one can tell him what he wants to hear." Emma felt a surge of pride in the Cherokee people who were protecting them through their silence, despite facing military interrogation and potential punishment. Their loyalty went beyond tribal boundaries to encompass basic human decency, protecting children regardless of their race. "Tomorrow the captain will interview Walks with Bears, the elder who remembers the old treaties," Ayana announced. "He is the most respected Cherokee voice in this region, and his words carry weight, even with white authorities. If anyone can plant seeds of doubt about the brigade's story, it is him. But will he risk exposing himself by defending us?" Lucy asked, her growing understanding of frontier politics making her question even their allies' safety. "He will tell the truth," Ayana said simply. The Cherokee people do not make war on children, do not attack families traveling peacefully through our territories. Whether the captain chooses to believe these truths depends on his wisdom and courage. The plan they developed was audacious in its simplicity. Emma and Lucy would approach the trading post as lost children who had escaped from their Cherokee captors, but their story would contain carefully crafted details that would lead an intelligent investigator toward the real truth about the Hayes Brigade. "You must be convincing in your fear and confusion," Ayanna instructed, as she helped Emma practice the trembling voice and anxious mannerisms of a traumatized child. "But also clever enough to plant information that will make him question the brigade's version of events." Lucy proved surprisingly adept at this kind of performance, her natural sensitivity allowing her to project vulnerability while maintaining her inner strength. Emma struggled more with the deception, her straightforward nature rebelling against the layers of misdirection required for their plan to succeed. "Remember," Ayanna counseled, "you are not lying about the important things. You are genuinely orphaned children who witnessed terrible crimes. You are truly seeking justice for your murdered parents. The only deception is allowing the captain to believe you escaped from Cherokee captors rather than being saved by Cherokee protectors." As dawn broke on the day of their mission, Ayanna performed a blessing ceremony that drew upon both Cherokee traditions and the Christian prayers the sisters remembered from their former life. The blending of spiritual practices seemed appropriate for children who were themselves becoming bridges between cultures. "Great Spirit who is known by many names," Ayanna intoned as she placed protective amulets around the sisters' necks. "Watch over these young ones as they walk the dangerous path between truth and deception, justice and safety. Give them wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent, courage to face those who would harm them, and strength to serve the greater good." Emma felt the weight of the hidden Cherokee amulet against her chest as she and Lucy made their way through the forest toward Miller's trading post. Both girls carried carefully prepared evidence, torn pieces of white fabric that could have come from their original clothes, a few personal items that had actually survived the wagon train massacre, and most importantly, detailed knowledge of the Hayes Brigade that only genuine witnesses could possess. The trading post came into view as morning mist began to lift from the valley. It was a rough frontier establishment that served as a meeting point for trappers, hunters, Cherokee traders, and the occasional military patrol. Emma could see the cavalry horses picketed nearby and soldiers moving about their temporary camp with the purposeful efficiency of a military unit on assignment. "Remember," Emma whispered to Lucy as they approached the post's main building, "we're scared, confused, and grateful to see soldiers. But we're also determined to tell the truth about what happened to our family." Lucy nodded, her hand unconsciously touching the hidden amulet Ayanna had given her. "I won't forget anything grandmother taught us." The use of the kinship term for Ayanna strengthened Emma's resolve. They weren't just seeking justice for their murdered parents anymore. They were protecting the Cherokee people who had become their new family, ensuring that innocent people wouldn't be punished for crimes they hadn't committed. As they emerged from the tree line, deliberately stumbling and appearing exhausted, several soldiers immediately noticed their approach. Emma heard shouted commands and the sound of boots running across wooden planking as the military camp mobilized in response to their appearance. "Children," a young officer called out, his voice carrying both relief and excitement. "Are you the Whitman girls, Emma and Lucy?" 3 days after their testimony to Captain Morrison, Emma crouched behind a fallen oak tree, watching the Hayes Brigade's hidden supply depot through field glasses the military had provided. The camp sprawled across a natural clearing 2 miles from Miller's trading post, concealed by dense forest but clearly visible from the elevated position where she lay motionless in the pre-dawn darkness. Beside her, Sequoia counted the guards with the methodical precision of a Cherokee warrior, who had learned military tactics from necessity rather than formal training. His whispered observations painted a picture of a well-organized criminal operation that had grown comfortable with impunity. 12 men visible, he reported in barely audible English. 3 watching the approaches, 2 by the supply wagons, 7 around the central fire, all armed with military rifles. Emma studied the layout through her field glasses, noting details that would be crucial for the coordinated assault Captain Morrison was planning. But more importantly, she was searching for specific individuals whose capture would provide the irrefutable proof needed to clear Cherokee people of blame for frontier violence. "There," she whispered, adjusting the focus on her glasses. "By the largest tent. That's Hayes, the leader. I can see the crescent scar on his left hand from here." The sight of the man who had murdered her parents sent a surge of refined anger through Emma's system, the kind of controlled fury that Ayanna had taught her to channel into focused determination rather than reckless hatred. Hayes stood casually beside a fire, drinking coffee and discussing plans with his lieutenants, as if the systematic murder of families was merely another business transaction. "The man beside him has the snake tattoo," Emma continued, recognizing the distinctive marking on the subordinate's exposed forearm. "That's 2 positive identifications we can provide to the captain." Lucy emerged from the forest behind them, with the fluid silence she had mastered during months of Cherokee training. Her ability to move undetected through dense undergrowth had made her invaluable for reconnaissance missions that required accessing information from multiple angles. "The supply wagons contain weapons stolen from army depots," she reported quietly. "I counted at least 30 rifles, ammunition boxes, and what looks like military uniforms they use for their disguises." Emma felt a surge of pride in her sisters. Development from traumatized child to competent operative. Lucy's natural sensitivity had evolved into an almost supernatural ability to observe details others missed, while her gentle nature allowed her to approach dangerous situations without triggering defensive responses. "Any sign of Cherokee disguises?" Sequoia asked, knowing this evidence would be crucial for proving the brigade's deception tactics. Lucy nodded grimly. "War paint supplies, feathers, clothing made to look like traditional Cherokee gear, but obviously manufactured by white traders. Everything needed to impersonate warriors during raids." The 3 young people exchanged looks of grim satisfaction. They had gathered exactly the evidence Captain Morrison needed to prove Hayes' brigade responsibility for attacks previously blamed on Cherokee people. But obtaining this proof had required infiltrating one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the frontier. "We need to return to the rendezvous point," Emma decided, checking the position of the stars to estimate time remaining before dawn. "The captain will want this intelligence before launching his assault." As they prepared to withdraw from their observation position, a commotion erupted in the brigade camp below. Shouts echoed through the forest as men scrambled for weapons and defensive positions. Emma raised her field glasses again, trying to determine what had triggered the sudden alert. "Riders approaching from the east," Sequoia observed, his enhanced hearing picking up sounds of horses moving through the forest. Multiple horses, moving fast. Emma focused her glasses on the eastern edge of the clearing, just as a group of mounted men emerged from the trees. Her heart sank as she recognized the distinctive uniforms and equipment of a cavalry patrol. But not Captain Morrison's unit. "That's Colonel Brennan," she whispered, remembering briefings Morrison had provided about other military commanders in the region. The officer who originally ordered the investigation into Cherokee involvement. The implications were immediately clear and terrifying. Colonel Brennan's arrival could only mean that someone had warned the Hayes Brigade about Morrison's planned assault. Either the brigade had informants within the military, or Brennan himself was complicit in their operations. They watched in horror as Hayes greeted the colonel with the casual familiarity of long association. Money changed hands, maps were consulted, and plans were obviously being coordinated between the military commander and the criminal leader. "We have to warn Captain Morrison," Lucy whispered urgently. "If Colonel Brennan is working with the brigade, the captain's entire unit could be walking into a trap." Emma's mind raced through possibilities and dangers. Racing back to warn Morrison would mean abandoning their observation post and potentially missing crucial intelligence about enemy plans. But allowing honest soldiers to be ambushed by corrupt officials and criminal allies would be unconscionable. Then Lucy returned to Morrison immediately, Emma decided, addressing Sequoia. "I'll maintain surveillance here and gather more information about their plans." Sequoia shook his head firmly. "Too dangerous. You cannot escape alone if discovered. Someone has to stay and monitor their coordination," Emma insisted. "We need to know exactly what kind of trap they're setting." Lucy surprised both of them by providing the solution. "I'll stay. My Cherokee training is better for hiding, and Emma's knowledge of military tactics is needed to brief the captain properly." Emma started to protest that Lucy was too young for such a dangerous assignment, but stopped herself. Her sister had repeatedly demonstrated competence and courage that belied her age. More importantly, Lucy's suggestion made tactical sense. "If you're discovered, don't try to fight," Emma instructed, embracing her sister quickly. "Use Cherokee. Stealth to escape and return to Ayana. She'll know how to protect you." As Emma and Sequoia made their way rapidly through the forest toward Morrison's camp, Emma carried the weight of leaving Lucy in extreme danger. But she also carried pride in her sister's transformation from frightened refugee to capable operative, willing to risk her life for justice. They reached Morrison's position just as the young captain was finalizing plans for the dawn assault on the brigade's supply depot. Emma's arrival with news of Colonel Brennan's involvement sent shockwaves through the military camp. "Are you absolutely certain it was Brennan?" Morrison demanded, his face pale with the implications of a superior officer's corruption. "Positive identification," Emma confirmed. "I watched him meet with Hayes, exchange money, and coordinate plans using military maps." Morrison's staff officers exchanged troubled glances as they realized their mission had suddenly become exponentially more complex. Confronting criminal brigands was one thing. Challenging a corrupt colonel required different strategies and greater risks. "Sir," one lieutenant ventured cautiously, "if Colonel Brennan is involved with the brigade, our entire operation could be compromised. He has access to all military communications and troop movements." Morrison studied Emma with the respect he had developed for her intelligence and reliability. "What did you observe about their coordination? Are they planning to counter our assault?" Emma described the meeting she had witnessed, emphasizing the urgency with which plans were being made and the obvious familiarity between military and criminal leadership. "They're definitely preparing for conflict, but I couldn't determine specific tactics from my observation position. That's why Lucy stayed behind," Sequoia added, drawing surprised looks from the military officers. "She will gather intelligence about their plans and escape before dawn." Morrison's expression reflected both admiration and concern for the young. "A girl's courage. If she's discovered, she won't be," Emma said with confidence, born of witnessing Lucy's development over months of Cherokee training. "But we need to be prepared to extract her quickly when she completes her mission." The next hour passed in intense planning as Morrison and his officers developed new strategies that accounted for potential corruption at higher military levels. Emma found herself functioning as a key advisor, her combination of witness testimony and reconnaissance intelligence making her perspectives valuable for tactical planning. "We can't simply assault the brigade camp now," Morrison concluded. "If Brennan is coordinating with them, we could face a combined force of criminals and corrupt soldiers. We need evidence of military involvement before we can move against either." A group, Emma understood that their mission had evolved beyond simply proving Cherokee innocence to exposing corruption that reached deep into frontier military command. The stakes were now much higher, but so was the potential impact of success. As dawn approached without Lucy's return, tension in the military camp became almost unbearable. Emma fought against the urge to abandon the mission and search for her sister, trusting in Lucy's training and Ayana's teachings about patience during dangerous operations. Finally, just as pink light began to touch the eastern horizon, Lucy materialized from the forest with the supernatural quiet she had mastered. Her clothes were torn and muddy, evidence of a difficult escape, but her eyes shone with the satisfaction of successful intelligence gathering. "They're planning to ambush your assault," she reported immediately to Captain Morrison. "Colonel Brennan brought 20 additional soldiers who will attack your forces from behind while the brigade engages from the front." Morrison's face hardened as he absorbed this confirmation of military corruption. "When is this ambush scheduled?" 2 hours after sunrise," Lucy continued. "But there's more. I overheard Brennan and Hayes discussing other operations. Raids planned on Cherokee settlements to justify military action against hostile tribes." Emma felt sick as she understood the full scope of the corruption they were fighting. Not only were criminals murdering innocent families and blaming Cherokee people, but military officers were planning to attack Cherokee communities to create evidence supporting their false accusations. "We have to stop them," Emma said firmly, "both the ambush and the planned raids on Cherokee settlements." Morrison studied both sisters with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal concern. "What you're proposing is essentially a rebellion against military authority. If we move against Colonel Brennan without absolute proof of his corruption, we could all face court-martial and execution." "Then we get absolute proof," Lucy said with the matter-of-fact determination that had characterized her approach to dangerous situations since their parents' murder. Emma understood that her sister was right. Half measures and cautious approaches would not serve justice when faced with systematic corruption and planned genocide against Cherokee communities. They needed evidence so overwhelming that even military courts would be forced to acknowledge the truth. "There's a meeting scheduled for mid-morning," Lucy continued. "Brennan and Hayes will finalize their coordination at the brigade camp. If we could record their conversation, document the money transfers, photograph the stolen military equipment." Morrison's eyes lit with understanding. "Evidence that would be impossible to deny or explain away. But gathering that evidence would require infiltrating the camp during daylight hours while both groups are present," Sequoia pointed out. "Extremely dangerous, probably suicidal." Emma looked at her sister and saw her own determination reflected in Lucy's eyes. They had both been transformed by their months with Ayana from traumatized refugees into agents of justice capable of making difficult decisions under extreme pressure. "We've been preparing for this moment since the day Ayana first taught us about healing through understanding," Emma said quietly. "Our parents didn't die just so we could survive. They died so we could learn to prevent other families from suffering the same fate." Morrison studied both girls with the recognition that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Children who had been forged by tragedy into instruments of justice that could accomplish missions beyond the capability of conventional military forces. "If we do this," he said slowly, "there's no guarantee any of us will survive. Brennan has the authority to have us all shot as traitors if we're caught." Lucy's response carried the wisdom Ayana had taught them about choosing principle over safety. Sometimes doing what's right is more important than doing what's safe. As the sun climbed higher and the time for their most dangerous mission approached, Emma felt the weight of everything Ayana had taught them about courage, wisdom, and the responsibility that came with the power to heal or harm. Their Cherokee grandmother had prepared them for this moment when all their training would be tested against forces that represented the worst of both white and native worlds. The hidden canyon that had sheltered their healing seemed very far away as they prepared to walk directly into the heart of darkness that had shaped their young lives. But they carried Ayana's teachings with them, along with the Cherokee amulets that reminded them they were not alone in this fight for justice. The plan Morrison and the sisters developed required precise timing and flawless execution. Emma would pose as a lost child who had wandered away from the trading post, creating a distraction that would allow Lucy to infiltrate the meeting between Colonel Brennan and Hayes. Sequoia would position himself as backup, ready to provide covering fire if their extraction became violent. "Remember," Morrison instructed as they made final preparations, "we need Brennan's words recorded clearly. His exact instructions about attacking Cherokee settlements, his coordination with Hayes, any mention of other corrupt officers." Emma checked the small recording device Morrison had provided, a military innovation that used wax cylinders to capture conversations. Hidden beneath her dress, it would be nearly impossible to detect, unless someone conducted a thorough search. "What if they don't believe I'm just a lost child?" Emma asked, voicing the concern that could destroy their entire mission. "You've survived in the wilderness for months," Morrison replied. "Your appearance and knowledge will support the story of a frontier child who got separated from her family. Just remember to act frightened and confused, not competent and observant." Lucy emerged from behind a supply wagon wearing Cherokee clothing that had been artificially aged and damaged to suggest weeks of hard travel. Her disguise was more complex. She would approach the brigade camp as a Cherokee girl, fleeing from military patrols, seeking sanctuary with people she believed were fellow victims of army persecution. "The irony is perfect," she observed with dark humor. "I'll be a Cherokee child, seeking protection from criminals who disguise themselves as Cherokee warriors." Sequoia adjusted the sights on his rifle, his expression reflecting the gravity of their situation. "If either of you is discovered before gathering the evidence, I will create a diversion to allow escape. Do not attempt rescue. Complete the mission and let Ayana know what happened." Emma felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with contemplating the possibility of losing another family member to violence. But Ayana's teachings about courage and sacrifice reminded her that some causes justified extreme risks. "We all go home together," she said firmly, "or we make sure the truth survives even if we don't." The approach to the brigade camp required them to separate and travel different routes that would bring them to their target simultaneously, but from different directions. Emma's path took her along the main trail that connected various frontier settlements, allowing her to approach as a genuine traveler who had simply taken a wrong turn. As she walked toward what she knew was extreme danger, Emma reflected on the transformation she and Lucy had undergone since that terrible morning when their world collapsed in gunfire and flames. The frightened children who had hidden behind the waterfall bore little resemblance to the confident operatives now executing a mission that could save countless lives. Ayana's teachings had given them more than survival skills. They had learned to see beyond the surface of human conflict to the deeper patterns that drove violence and hatred. Understanding those patterns made it possible to disrupt them, to choose healing over revenge, justice over retribution. The sound of voices ahead alerted Emma that she was approaching the brigade's perimeter. She immediately shifted into the role of a lost and frightened child, allowing her voice to carry through the forest as she called out in apparent confusion, "Hello? Is anyone there? I think I'm lost." The response was immediate, crashing sounds through the underbrush as brigade sentries moved to investigate. Emma forced herself to remain in character as armed men emerged from concealment, their suspicious expressions gradually softening as they assessed what appeared to be a harmless child. "Well, well," one of them said with a cruel smile. "What have we here?" "Please, sir," Emma replied with perfectly feigned innocence. "I got separated from my family at the trading post. Have you seen them? The Hendersons? They were supposed to meet me by the big oak tree, but I got turned around." The brigands exchanged glances, clearly debating whether this unexpected arrival represented opportunity or threat. Emma held her breath, knowing that her life depended on their assessment of her as a potential victim rather than a potential witness. "You're pretty far from any trading post, little girl," the second man observed suspiciously. "How'd you end up way out here?" Emma had prepared for this question, drawing on her genuine knowledge of frontier geography. "I followed what I thought was the main trail, but it just kept going deeper into the forest. I've been walking since yesterday and I haven't eaten anything." The mention of food and her obviously genuine exhaustion seemed to convince the brigands that she posed no immediate threat. More importantly, her presence provided them with an opportunity they couldn't resist, another victim to eliminate after their current business was concluded. "Come on then," the first man said with false kindness. "We'll take you to our camp, get you fed and rested. Maybe someone there has seen your family." As they escorted her toward the brigade's central camp, Emma caught glimpses of Lucy moving through the forest, parallel to their path. Her sister's Cherokee training allowed her to remain virtually invisible while maintaining visual contact with Emma's situation. The camp itself was larger and more organized than Emma had expected from her earlier reconnaissance. Supply wagons formed defensive positions around central tents, while armed guards maintained watch from carefully constructed positions that provided overlapping fields of fire. Most importantly, she could see Colonel Brennan's military tent prominently, positioned near the center of the camp, with his cavalry horses picketed nearby. The meeting between corrupt military leadership and criminal brigands was clearly about to begin. "Wait here," one of her escorts instructed, gesturing toward a fallen log near the camp's edge. "Someone will bring you food shortly." Emma settled onto the makeshift seat, using the opportunity to activate the recording device hidden beneath her dress while scanning the camp for signs of Lucy's infiltration. Her sister would need to position herself close enough to the command tent to capture clear recordings of the conspiracy being planned inside. The sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of additional military personnel, more of Colonel Brennan's corrupt officers coming to coordinate their attacks on innocent Cherokee communities. Emma felt her refined anger building as she contemplated the systematic nature of the injustice they were fighting. Hayes emerged from the largest tent, his distinctive scar clearly visible as he gestured for the military officers to join him. Inside, this was the moment their entire mission had been building toward, the gathering of irrefutable evidence that would expose the conspiracy and save countless lives. A commotion near the camp's eastern perimeter suddenly drew everyone's attention. Shouts in Cherokee echoed through the forest, followed by the distinctive sound of traditional war cries that sent brigade members scrambling for their weapons. Emma's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Real Cherokee warriors had discovered the brigade's camp and were launching an attack, not knowing that Emma and Lucy were inside gathering crucial evidence. The timing couldn't have been worse, threatening to destroy their mission just as it reached its critical moment. But as the war cries grew louder and brigade members took defensive positions, Emma caught a glimpse of something that changed her understanding of the situation entirely. Among the Cherokee voices echoing through the forest, she heard one that was unmistakably familiar. Ayanna had come for them. The final test of their transformation from victims to protectors was about to begin, but they would not face it alone. Their Cherokee grandmother and her warriors were about to demonstrate that some bonds transcend blood, race, and the artificial boundaries that divide peoples who should stand together against injustice. The Cherokee war cries that echoed through the forest were not the sounds of a traditional attack, Emma realized as she listened, with ears trained by months of cultural immersion. They were the complex vocal signals Ayanna had taught her, messages being passed between warriors who were coordinating a sophisticated rescue operation rather than launching a vengeful assault. Inside the command tent, she could hear Colonel Brennan's voice rising in panic as he barked orders to his subordinates. "It's a coordinated Cherokee attack. They must have discovered our location somehow. Prepare for siege warfare." Hayes's response carried the cold calculation of a professional. "Killer. Perfect timing, actually. When we repel this attack, it'll provide perfect justification for the punitive raids we've been planning. Dead Cherokee warriors make excellent evidence of hostile activity." Emma's blood chilled as she understood that even this apparent disaster was being twisted by their enemies into an opportunity for greater violence. The recording device beneath her dress captured every word as the conspiracy revealed its true scope, not just criminal activity disguised as Indian raids, but deliberate provocation designed to justify genocide. "Sir," one of Brennan's officers called from outside the tent, "the Cherokee positions suggest this is a rescue operation, not an attack. They're not trying to overrun the camp. They're creating extraction corridors." Emma felt a surge of pride in Ayanna's tactical wisdom. Rather than launching a traditional assault that would result in massive casualties on both sides, the Cherokee warriors were implementing a strategy that prioritized saving Emma and Lucy while gathering the evidence needed to expose the conspiracy. Soft whistle, barely audible above the sounds of military preparation, caught Emma's attention. She turned to see Lucy emerging from behind a supply wagon, her Cherokee clothing now serving as perfect camouflage among the increasingly chaotic activity in the camp. "Did you get the recordings?" Lucy whispered as she approached Emma's position. Near the fallen log, Emma nodded, patting the hidden device. "Everything we need. Brennan's coordination with Hayes, their plans for attacking Cherokee settlements, even discussions of other corrupt officers. It's all here. Then we need to extract them immediately," Lucy replied, glancing toward the command tent, where military and criminal leaders were still coordinating their response to the Cherokee presence. Ayanna's warriors can only maintain this diversion for so long before someone realizes what's really happening. As if summoned by their conversation, Sequoia materialized from the forest edge with the fluid grace that marked Cherokee movement through natural terrain. His appearance at the camp's perimeter should have triggered immediate alarm, but the general chaos created by the rescue operation provided perfect camouflage for his infiltration. "Grandmother sends word," he announced quietly as he reached the sisters. "Extract to the sacred grove in 10 minutes. Warriors will provide covering fire, but you must move quickly when the signal comes." Emma understood that their escape window would be brief and dangerous. The moment they left their current positions, they would become targets for both brigade gunmen and potentially paranoid military personnel who might not distinguish between Cherokee rescuers and Cherokee attackers. "What's the signal?" Lucy asked, her hand unconsciously checking the Cherokee amulet hidden beneath her disguise. Sequoia's answer came in the form of demonstration rather than words. He produced a small flute carved from river cane and played a brief melody that sounded like nothing more than bird song to untrained ears. But Emma and Lucy recognized it immediately as one of the communication codes Ayanna had taught them during their months in the hidden canyon. "When you hear that song," Sequoia explained, "run directly toward the eastern ridge. Don't look back. Don't try to help if someone falls behind. Trust the warriors to handle the pursuit while you escape with the evidence." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Emma's shoulders as she understood that the success of their entire mission, the exposure of military corruption, the prevention of attacks on Cherokee communities, the vindication of their murdered parents, now depended on her ability to protect a small wax cylinder recording while navigating a combat zone. Inside the command tent, Colonel Brennan's voice was reaching new levels of agitation. "Where are the Cherokee positions? How many warriors are we facing? I need tactical assessments, not wild guesses." "Difficult to count, sir," came the response from one of his scouts. "They're using traditional concealment techniques. Could be a dozen, could be 50. They're not presenting clear targets." Emma recognized the frustration in the military voices as trained soldiers struggled to apply conventional tactics against an enemy who refused to fight according to European rules of warfare. Ayana's warriors were demonstrating the effectiveness of indigenous strategies that had protected Cherokee people for generations. Hayes emerged from the command tent with several heavily armed brigade members, his scarred hand gesturing toward various positions around the camp's perimeter. "Forget military protocol," he snarled at Brennan's officers. "We burn them out, set fire to the forest, and drive them into the open where we can cut them down." The casual discussion of using fire as a weapon against people hiding in the forest horrified Emma. Such tactics would endanger not only the Cherokee warriors, but every living thing in the surrounding area. A level of environmental destruction that reflected the brigade's complete disregard for anything beyond their immediate criminal objectives. "You can't set forest fires during the dry season," one of Brennan's more experienced officers protested. "The flames could spread for miles, destroy settlements, kill civilians." "Acceptable casualties," Hayes replied with chilling indifference. "We need this Cherokee problem eliminated permanently. A few burned cabins and dead families will only reinforce the narrative that these savages pose an ongoing threat to civilized settlers." Emma's recording device captured this exchange with perfect clarity, providing evidence of planned atrocities that would shock even frontier communities accustomed to violence. But the immediate threat to Ayana's warriors and the surrounding forest required urgent action rather than patient evidence gathering. The distinctive melody of Sequoia's flute suddenly filled the air, its notes carrying clearly above the sounds of military preparation and brigade coordination. Emma felt her heart rate accelerate as she understood that their extraction window had opened. "Now," Sequoia whispered, already beginning to move toward the eastern ridge with the flowing motion that made Cherokee warriors nearly impossible to track or target. Emma and Lucy rose from their concealed positions simultaneously, their months of training allowing them to coordinate movement without verbal communication. As they began their sprint toward the extraction point, Emma heard shouts of alarm from brigade sentries who had finally noticed their presence. "The children! The Whitman girls! They're escaping!" Gunfire erupted behind them as brigade members and military personnel realized that their supposed victims had been gathering intelligence throughout the meeting. Emma felt bullets whistling past her head as she ran, her Cherokee training allowing her to use natural cover while maintaining speed toward the rendezvous point. Lucy stumbled over a hidden route but recovered immediately, her months of mountain conditioning enabling her to maintain pace despite the treacherous terrain. Around them, the forest came alive with the sounds of Cherokee warriors providing covering fire, not the random violence of desperate fighters, but the precise tactical support of experienced hunters protecting their young. "There," Lucy pointed, toward a gap in the trees where Ayana waited beside two saddled horses, her weathered face showing both relief and fierce pride as she watched her adopted granddaughters complete their dangerous mission. The Cherokee grandmother's presence at the extraction point represented more than simple rescue. It symbolized the completion of their transformation from traumatized refugees into agents of justice, capable of serving both their birth culture and their adopted family. Emma reached Ayanna first, immediately transferring the recording device to the older woman's protection while accepting the horse reins offered to her. "We got everything," she gasped, adrenaline and exertion making her voice trembling. Brennan's entire conspiracy, their plans for attacking Cherokee settlements, evidence of other corrupt officers. Ayanna's eyes shone with satisfaction as she secured the precious evidence. "You have done more than save Cherokee lives, granddaughters. You have proven that healing and justice can triumph over hatred and violence when people of good heart work together." Lucy mounted her horse with the fluid grace that marked her adaptation to Cherokee ways of life. Will the recordings be enough to stop them? Combined with Captain Morrison's testimony and the physical evidence in their camp, it will be more than enough, Ayanna replied, swinging onto her own mount with the agility that belied her years. "But first, we must ensure that you both survive to present this evidence to authorities who can act upon it." The sound of pursuit was growing louder, as brigade members and corrupt military personnel organized a coordinated chase. But Emma felt no fear as they began their ride towards safety. Their months with Ayanna had taught them that some battles require courage that goes beyond physical bravery, the willingness to stand for principles that transcend personal safety or comfort. As they rode deeper into Cherokee territory, following paths known only to indigenous peoples who had lived in these mountains for countless generations, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The massacre that had destroyed their birth family had also opened the door to understanding and wisdom they could never have gained in their original world. Their parents' death had been transformed from meaningless tragedy into purposeful sacrifice, providing the motivation and moral authority needed to expose corruption that threatened both Cherokee and white communities. James and Margaret Whitman's dedication to justice and respect for indigenous peoples lived on through their daughter's mission to build bridges between divided worlds. 2 hours of hard riding brought them to a mountain meadow where Captain Morrison waited with a small force of loyal soldiers. The young officer's face showed both relief and professional excitement as he realized that their dangerous gambit had succeeded. "The evidence?" he asked immediately, understanding that everything depended on the intelligence Emma and Lucy had gathered. Ayanna handed him the recording device, along with detailed notes the sisters had compiled during their infiltration. Complete confession of military conspiracy to frame Cherokee people for criminal activities, plans for unprovoked attacks on indigenous communities, and identification of corrupt officers throughout the territorial command structure. Morrison listened to portions of the recordings with growing amazement and anger. "This goes far beyond simple criminal activity. We're looking at systematic corruption that reaches the highest levels of frontier military administration. What happens now?" Emma asked, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion as adrenaline began to fade from her system. Morrison's expression reflected both determination and uncertainty. "We present this evidence to military authorities in Washington, along with corroborating testimony from Cherokee witnesses and physical evidence from the brigade's camp. If we're successful, it will result in court-martial proceedings and criminal trials that could reshape frontier policy." Lucy, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke with the wisdom that had characterized her observations throughout their journey. "The most important thing isn't punishing the bad people, it's making sure other families don't suffer like ours did." Ayanna nodded approvingly at this insight. Healing comes not from revenge, but from preventing future wounds. Justice serves the living, not the dead. Over the following weeks, as military investigators arrived from Washington to examine the evidence Emma and Lucy had gathered, The sisters found themselves at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond their personal healing. Their testimony helped expose a network of corruption that had been responsible for dozens of attacks previously blamed on Cherokee people. Colonel Brennan and the Hayes Brigade leadership faced military tribunals that resulted in executions for treason and murder. More importantly, their exposure led to policy changes that required independent verification of claims about indigenous hostility and established new protocols for investigating frontier violence. Captain Morrison received promotion and commendation for his role in uncovering the conspiracy, but privately he credited the sisters' courage and Cherokee wisdom for making justice possible. His official reports emphasized the crucial role played by indigenous allies in protecting innocent settlers from criminal exploitation. As winter deepened and the immediate danger passed, Emma and Lucy faced decisions about their future that would define the rest of their lives. Offers arrived from relatives in Virginia who wanted to provide them with traditional educations and safe, comfortable lives far from the frontier violence that had shaped them. But the sisters had been transformed by their experiences into something unprecedented. Bridges between worlds who could serve both communities in ways that purely Cherokee or purely white individuals could not. Their unique perspective and hard-won skills made them valuable as translators, negotiators, and advocates for peaceful coexistence. "We want to stay," Emma announced during a family council that included Ayanna, Sequoia, and several Cherokee elders who had come to regard the sisters as valuable members of their community. "Not just with you, but working to prevent the kind of misunderstanding and hatred that makes violence possible." Lucy's agreement carried the quiet determination that had marked her growth from traumatized child to confident young woman. "We learned that healing is something people do together. We want to keep doing that work." Ayanna's smile reflected both pride and recognition that her teachings had taken root in fertile ground. "You will always have a home among Cherokee people, granddaughters, but your calling may take you to many places where bridges between worlds are needed." As spring returned to the Tennessee mountains and the sisters celebrated their first anniversary of survival, Emma began writing a detailed account of their experiences. Her journal had evolved from a simple record of daily events into a sophisticated analysis of frontier politics, indigenous wisdom, and the possibilities that emerged when people chose understanding over prejudice. "Someone needs to tell the whole story," she explained to Lucy as they worked together beside the waterfall where their old lives had ended and their new ones had begun. "Not just the parts that make Cherokee people look good or white people look bad, but the complicated truth about how healing happens when people work together despite their differences." Lucy's contribution to this project involved documenting the medicinal knowledge Ayanna had taught them, creating detailed drawings and descriptions of plants and healing practices that could benefit anyone regardless of their cultural background. Her work would eventually become one of the most comprehensive records of traditional Cherokee medicine ever compiled. The waterfall continued its eternal song as the sisters worked on their various projects, its music serving as a reminder that some things endure beyond human conflict and tragedy. The violence that had brought them to this place had been transformed through Cherokee wisdom into understanding that could serve future generations. Years later, when Emma and Lucy had become respected advocates for peaceful coexistence between indigenous and settler communities, they would return regularly to this waterfall. They came not just to remember their parents and honor their Cherokee family, but to renew their commitment to the healing work that had grown from their deepest wounds. Their story had become more than a tale of survival and justice. It was a testament to the possibility that even the worst human experiences could be transformed through wisdom, courage, and the willingness to see enemies as potential allies in the universal struggle against violence and hatred. The hidden canyon that had sheltered their healing remained sacred to them, but it was no longer a refuge from the world. Instead, it had become a source of strength that enabled them to engage with the world's challenges while maintaining the balance between heart and mind that Ayanna had taught them. Emma and Lucy Whitman had survived the worst that human nature could offer and emerged as living proof that healing wisdom could transcend any boundary, racial, cultural, or personal. Their parents' dream of peaceful coexistence between peoples lived on through daughters who had learned to walk between worlds with understanding, courage, and hope. The waterfall sang its eternal song, washing clean the stones where one story had ended and another had begun, continuing its ancient work of transformation that turned even the hardest experiences into something beautiful and enduring. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.